It's 1972, and this is the moment that football toppled baseball as America's favorite sport. But how did we get here? How could anything dethrone the sport known as America's pastime? Let's rewind 12 years to January 1960. Pete Rozelle, a 33-year-old PR guy, has just been reluctantly handed the reins of a fractured, financially desperate NFL. Despite the progress that had been made, pro football was a mud-soaked afterthought compared to the untouchable cultural religion that was Major League Baseball. The MLB was drawing 20 million live fans a year, while some NFL teams scraped by on meager TV payouts as low as $75,000 for the year. Football didn't just need help, it needed a miracle. What did Pete think he could do? Well, what follows is the miraculous story of how a trailing football league and its commissioner used a shorter season, a controversial loophole from Congress, and the fast-paced culture of the 1960s to completely destroy baseball's grip on America, at least until baseball started fighting back. We dove into the broadcast archives and financial ledgers to uncover how the NFL engineered their three-pronged assault against baseball. Hit subscribe, because we are recreating the mystery of the exact moment baseball lost its crown, and how people like Pete Rozelle pulled it off. To understand how baseball gained its seemingly unbeatable dominance, we have to turn the clock back, way back. Legendary franchises like the New York Yankees, Chicago Cubs, and Boston Red Sox had been building their mythologies since the dawn of the 20th century. Long before flat screens lit up living rooms, baseball was a theater of the mind. Families would gather around the warm hum of the radio, listening to the slow, deliberate pace of the game. And when the broadcaster's voice suddenly spiked at the crack of a bat, everyone in the room would jump out of their seats. It wasn't just a game, it was an American institution. The only thing greater than listening was experiencing it in person. Baseball was built on a leisurely, deliberate pace, with plenty of downtime to talk to friends, grab a bag of roasted peanuts, and wait for the home team to rally. It was a full afternoon of sun-drenched entertainment, and the near-daily schedule made tickets cheap and accessible for the working class. It perfectly mirrored the comfortable, steady rhythm of mid-century American life. But across town, in the football stadiums, it was a different picture. In 1960, the NFL was still a shadow of its former self, with only 13 teams. In fact, arguably the most famous NFL team of all, the Dallas Cowboys, had just entered the league that year via an expansion and proceeded to go 0-11-1 in its opening season. Teams like the New York Giants and the Philadelphia Eagles had enough fans to get by, but small market teams like the St. Louis Cardinals battled for scraps. The game was still a hard, brutal slog, prone to injuries, especially as teams clashed on frozen dirt during the winter games. It had its fan base, but it had a long way to go to become America's favorite game. And baseball had no intention of relinquishing its crown. Ford Frick had ruled as MLB commissioner since 1951, and the NFL was the furthest thing from his mind. From his oak-paneled office, Frick oversaw the undisputed king of sports capitalism. He played hardball with the government to protect his league, expanded his schedule, and watched the revenue roll in. Frick saw baseball's dominance not as a competition, but as a permanent fact of American culture. After all, they owned the radio waves, the ticket stubs, and the hearts of the public, and they were completely unprepared for what was coming. The post-war 1950s ignited an industrial rocket ship, making luxury goods affordable for the working class. When Dad brought home that first black and white television set, family evenings changed forever. Suddenly, fans who lived hundreds of miles from a major city could watch professional sports live. But when they tuned into baseball, they discovered a glaring problem. Baseball fans will defend the excitement of their sport to the death, but television was its kryptonite. The game is played on a massive, sprawling diamond. If the bulky 1960s TV cameras zoomed in close on a player, you completely lost the context of the field. If they zoomed out to capture the outfield, the players looked like blurry ants scrambling across static. Baseball remained an incredible live experience, but it simply did not translate to the small screen. Football, on the other hand, was about to step into a cinematic goldmine. Unlike the sprawling outfield, the gridiron was a tightly packed war zone. Up-close TV cameras perfectly captured the dramatic slugfests at the line of scrimmage. Viewers could see the sweat, the high-speed collisions, and the heartbreaking fumbles right from their living rooms. Football was linear, explosive, and aggressively fast-paced. Television was the ultimate amplifier for the sport. But unlike the MLB, the NFL wasn't going to profit just by putting their games on the tube. They first needed to take down a major obstacle, and in this case, it wasn't baseball. It was their own greedy owners. At the time, broadcast deals for the MLB and NFL functioned similarly. Sports franchises in massive markets, like New York, were using their thousands of regional fans to negotiate wildly lucrative exclusive TV deals with local stations. They hoarded that cash, creating an imbalanced league where the rich got richer and the poor just tried to survive. The NFL could have simply followed this exact model, and the big market football owners certainly wanted to, but Rozelle knew the math was a death sentence. Baseball teams played over 150 games a season, which was more than enough live inventory to keep even a small market TV station profitable. The NFL, however, only played 12, and later 14 games a year. If professional football relied on local contracts, teams in smaller cities simply wouldn't generate enough broadcast revenue to keep the lights on. Rozelle realized that for football to survive, the individual teams couldn't be the product. The sport itself had to be sold as a single, bundled national event. But in the early 1960s, each NFL team operated as a totally independent business, and Pete Rozelle didn't have the authority to negotiate broadcast rights across the board. Plus, standing opposite of him was the towering figure of Wellington Mara, the owner of the New York Giants. Backed by the massive media market and blinding lights of New York City, Mara's deep pockets had already allowed him to negotiate a highly lucrative, exclusive local TV monopoly just for his team. Meanwhile, the Green Bay Packers were dominating the league and winning championships. But that alone didn't pay the bills in a tiny, snow-swept Wisconsin market. Because they lacked Mara's big city leverage, the Packers commanded only a fraction of the TV revenue, leaving them scrambling to keep the stadium doors open despite their success on the field. To fix the issue, Rozelle had to convince the richest men in the room to willingly give up their golden goose, and his idea would completely upend the history of sports business. Rozelle pitched a radical, almost socialist concept to his fiercely capitalist owners called League Think. The core philosophy was simple. What was good for one team was good for all of them. In a weak, bankrupt franchise hurt the entire league. While the players would brutally battle it out on Sunday afternoons, Rozelle urged the owners to treat each other as equal financial partners from Monday to Saturday. But to achieve this utopian vision, he had to convince the stubborn Wellington Mara to surrender his hard-fought New York television monopoly. The smoke-filled, backroom negotiations that followed are the stuff of sports legend. Rozelle demanded the major market owners agree to a completely unprecedented contract. He wanted to bundle the television rights of all 13 NFL teams into one single massive package, allowing the games to be broadcast evenly on a national network. Furthermore, the teams would pool their television revenues, splitting the profits evenly. This radical profit-sharing model would create a new era of parity, ensuring that even the small market teams like the Green Bay Packers could afford to compete. After intense pressure, Mara finally acquiesced for the good of the game, and a unified NFL was born. There was just one massive looming problem. By colluding to pool their media rights and fix their prices, the 13 NFL teams weren't just practicing League Think. They were committing a blatant violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, and the U.S. Department of Justice was knocking at the door. To understand why the federal government was already breathing down Rozelle's neck, you have to look at the mess he inherited. Back in the late 1940s, the NFL had already taken a gamble on television, and it backfired spectacularly. When teams started broadcasting games locally, fans realized they could just watch from the comfort of their living rooms for free. Stadium attendance plummeted, and franchises started bleeding money. In a desperate move to protect ticket sales, the NFL instituted strict blackout rules in 1951, refusing to broadcast games within a 75-mile radius of a home stadium. But the United States Department of Justice didn't care about the NFL's ticket sales. They saw these blackouts as an illegal restriction of trade, and in 1953, they slapped the league with a massive antitrust lawsuit. A federal judge named Alan Grimm handed down a highly restrictive ruling. He allowed the NFL to keep its core home game blackouts so teams wouldn't go completely bankrupt, but he put a tight legal leash on how the league could manage its television rights moving forward. Despite this, the NFL thought they had the ultimate trump card to argue against this ruling, and it came from an unexpected place: Major League Baseball. Decades earlier, in a bizarre 1922 Supreme Court ruling, baseball had been granted a golden, impenetrable legal shield. In Federal Baseball Club versus National League, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. essentially ruled that baseball games were merely local exhibitions, and that players crossing state lines were purely incidental to the sport. Because the court decided baseball did not constitute interstate commerce, it was declared completely exempt from the Sherman Antitrust Act. Baseball was legally allowed to operate as a massive, untouchable monopoly. The NFL's lawyers had previously marched into court arguing that if baseball was legally exempt, football should be too. But the judges weren't buying it. The Supreme Court frankly admitted that baseball's 1922 exemption was a historical anomaly, but they flat out refused to expand that mistake to other sports, ruling in 1957 that if football wanted a special loophole, they had to let Congress write it. So, the trap finally snapped shut on Rozelle in 1961, when he managed to convince his owners to pool their rights and sign a unified television deal with CBS. A familiar face intervened, Judge Alan Grimm. The exact same judge from the 1953 blackout lawsuit immediately struck the CBS contract down, ruling that the pooled TV deal was a blatant violation of his earlier antitrust orders. Rozelle's master plan was dead on arrival. It was time for a Hail Mary pass on Capitol Hill. Rozelle, a master of backroom persuasion, traded the courtroom for Congress. He launched a high-intensity lobbying campaign, targeting powerful politicians whose home districts desperately needed a financially stable football franchise. He argued that without pooled television revenue, smaller teams would simply cease to exist. His relentless schmoozing paid off in an astonishing legislative victory when Congress passed the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961. With the single stroke of a pen, professional sports leagues were granted a customized loophole, allowing them to pool their TV rights without violating antitrust laws. Leaguethink wasn't just a radical theory anymore, it was federal law. But the NFL's new TV deal wasn't going to propel them to dominance over baseball, because a civil war had just erupted in pro football, a war that threatened to destroy the league entirely. Beginning in 1960, the new American Football League came bounding onto the scene. Backed by deep-pocketed owners who had been denied entry into the NFL, the AFL was aggressively chipping away at the establishment. The AFL had inked a lucrative TV deal with ABC, similar to the one the NFL had just signed. With two leagues, competition for top college talent was more intense than ever. When the AFL poached a swaggering superstar quarterback named Joe Namath for a record-breaking $400,000 contract, player salaries skyrocketed, and the financial bleeding threatened to bankrupt both leagues entirely. It was in this chaotic crossfire that Pete Rozelle had a massive epiphany. Football was cannibalizing itself, and there was only one move that could save it. While the NFL and AFL were busy trying to destroy each other, Major League Baseball was sitting comfortably on the throne, soaking up the profits of a 162-game season. The NFL was still only playing 14 games a year. If professional football kept fighting this civil war, baseball would win by default. The true solution, the ultimate way to build a machine big enough to dethrone baseball, was to join forces. In 1966, after a series of furious, secret negotiations, Rozelle orchestrated the unthinkable. The two bitter enemies agreed to a massive merger, uniting to take down their common enemy. The NFL would ultimately double in size and absorb the AFL's teams in major media markets to finally rival baseball's colossal national footprint. Then, as the cherry on top, the leagues created a season-ending spectacle. In 1967, the NFL's Green Bay Packers trounced the AFL's Kansas City Chiefs in the AFL-NFL World Championship game, or as we now know it, Super Bowl I. Broadcast simultaneously on two different networks, the game drew a staggering 51 million viewers. The newly unified league had weaponized television and built a massive national footprint. But they still had one looming problem. All of their games were crammed into a single Sunday afternoon, splitting the attention of their fanbase. If they truly wanted to rip the crown away from baseball, they were going to have to engineer a radical culture-defining event. Because Major League Baseball played over 100 games a year, it wasn't just a sport, it was an ambient daily habit. Rozelle knew that if football stayed trapped and fractured on Sundays, it would never be anything more than a weekend hobby. You can't beat a daily habit on volume, but you can beat it on gravity. To finally rip the crown away from baseball, the NFL had to take its product out of the Sunday afternoon sports noise and thrust it onto the biggest, most exclusive stage in the world, national primetime television. Competing against wildly popular sitcoms and movies, Rozelle wanted to force the country to watch one single, massive football game. If he could hijack Monday night, he wouldn't just be selling a sport. He would be creating a mandatory, weekly cultural event. He would own the Monday morning anticipation, the Monday night watch parties, and the Tuesday morning water cooler talk. But the major networks, CBS and NBC, were absolutely terrified of the idea. They were making a fortune on their Monday night entertainment lineups, and they refused to hand over 3 hours of primetime real estate to a football game. Fortunately for Rozelle, there was a distant, desperate third-place network named ABC that was willing to take a massive gamble. and the contract they signed would change American culture forever. In the fall of 1970, Monday Night Football premiered on ABC, and it didn't just change television, it rewired the American week. Because the NFL season was so short, the scarcity principle took over. A single loss could derail a football team's entire season, whereas a baseball team could lose 60 games and still win the World Series. Roselle amplified this high-stakes drama with primetime showmanship. The broadcast featured blaring, iconic theme music, dramatic camera angles, and the controversial, larger-than-life commentary of broadcasters like Howard Cosell. Suddenly, football wasn't just a game you passively listened to on a Sunday afternoon. It was an aggressive, mandatory viewing experience. Across the country, local bars were packed to the brim with fans nursing beers and screaming at the screens. Neighborhoods formed massive weekly watch parties. Football successfully hijacked the American calendar, dominating Sunday afternoons and stretching the cultural hangover all the way through Tuesday morning. Ratings exploded. The aggressive, linear violence of the sport was a perfect match for the turbulent, fast-paced culture of the early 1970s. All the while, Major League Baseball just kept stubbornly plugging along, relying on a loyal but aging fan base, blissfully ignorant to the fact that the ground had completely fallen out from under them. It was 1972 when the dam finally broke. The prestigious analytics firm Gallup released its nationwide survey asking Americans to name their favorite sport. For the first time in the history of the United States, football sat alone at the top of the mountain. A massive 38% of Americans chose the NFL, while only 19% clung to baseball. The untouchable cultural religion had officially been dethroned. But baseball wasn't going to take it lying down forever. Today, the NFL completely dwarfs its former rival in pure viewership. The Super Bowl has evolved into an unofficial national holiday, regularly pulling in well over 100 million viewers, while a typical World Series game today hovers around 16 million. Despite this, baseball's foundation remains deep, loyal, and incredibly profitable. And just like football once stared bankruptcy in the face and realized it needed a radical miracle to survive, baseball is finally taking a page out of Pete Rozelle's playbook. They are aggressively adapting to the times. Just like television saved the NFL in the 1960s, cutting-edge technology is attempting to save baseball today. To combat the slow, leisurely pace that alienated younger, adrenaline-fueled fans, baseball has implemented a strict pitch clock to force the action. And in the 2026 season, the sport is embracing the future by rolling out an automated ball strike system to challenge human error behind the plate. Because if the 50-year war between the gridiron and the diamond teaches us anything, it's that there is only one permanent rule in the business of sports. You either evolve with the times or you become history. This isn't the first time an NFL rule change has saved the league from total collapse. To watch another league-saving story, like when a future NFL commissioner schemed up the NFL draft, click the video on the screen. Thanks for watching.